Ron and Romanay reason for reason. Ron is off tonight, but the show isn't. So we're going to move forward and start this conversation tonight, this discussion on the state of black education in our country. Last week, Ron and I reasoned about critical race theory and how it emerged in the 1970s in response to critical legal studies and argued that law was not objective. In simplicity, it was this theory that forced leaders to consider the concept of unequal distribution of wealth and power. We were forced to look at the racial inequalities that endure and persist in our country. This caused me to do a little research, and I dug to see which states in our country were actually continuing to ban racial theory, critical racial theory. And those states were Florida, Texas, Idaho, Montana, South Dakota, Utah, Arizona, North Dakota, Iowa, Oklahoma, Ohio, Alabama, and Kentucky. Not only have these states decided that they don't want this taught in their classrooms, they've banned discussions on critical race theory. This caused our country and the citizens to begin to trend about this topic, and to trend asking and posing the question as to why critical race theory wasn't being taught in the classroom, and how these are examples of systemic racism and how it affects our children in the school setting. Systemic racism is active and present in the school system. Are they hiding it? Is that why they don't want these discussions to take place? So now it's time for the village to begin a discussion on how we can learn to trust those who are educating our children. How does critical race theory tie into the effect of special education? I thought that exploring the intricacies of the educational system and critical race theory was a reason for us to reason. 7.8% of African American children are in special education. These are the highest numbers among all minorities. Why? Why is it that our children occupy the largest margin of special education students? Why have we gotten to a place as minority parents where we don't trust our educational system? Why have we gotten to a place where we argue and dispute when the school system tells us that our children need extra assistance in the classroom? Why are we refusing to participate in standardized testing that would offer our children individualized educational plans and different assistance in the classroom? I wasn't really sure about all the answers to these questions because those social workers are active in the classroom, though we do a lot of behavioral modification in the classroom, though we go in and some of us act as mobile therapists, some of us act as behavioral specialists. We are not the ones who are educating our children. So in order for me to attempt to bring a conversation that might foster some change, I thought it would be appropriate for us to call in someone who was more savvy with this topic, somebody who has in fact taught in the classroom, someone who has been passionate about the education of our children, and not just someplace like in the Poconos, but in the inner cities where the disparities are even more enormous than they are here. So to get the job done tonight,
Hello?
I asked my son Christopher Lashley to call in. Chris is he was a tenured classroom teacher for over a decade, and he now works as the supervisor for music, theater, and art for the Upper Darby School District. That is down in Delco County. So that's actually outside of the Philly area, the surrounding area. So first, I just want to make sure, Chris, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yep, I can hear you.
I want to welcome you to Reason for Reason. I know that your knowledge is going to serve tremendous wealth to our community of listeners, so I'm looking forward to this tonight. Let me just bring you up to speed on what's been going on. So Ron and I last week, I don't know if you listened to the show, but we reasoned over the topic of critical race theory. By the time we reached the end of the broadcast, we had began to tap into how critical race theory was affecting our educational system and exactly what the state of black education was in our country, how parents within our community were participating in active learning and readiness for our children. And so we promised that we would come back tonight. We actually announced that you was going to be on the show before we even checked in with you to ask. But we are excited. I'm sure Ron is listening from where he's at. But one of the first things that we wanted to ask you was, do you as an educator and as an administrator, do you believe that there's an overrepresentation of race and poverty among children in special education?
I would definitely say yes, but we have to look at population density at first, because I don't want to put the disparity that special education is a negative connotation on our community as African Americans. Because cities, we are very, represented within cities, and we're such, packed into a small area when it comes to the cities and the schools. It ends up looking as if children of color, black and brown children, are higher numbers when it comes to special education. So when you go out into the different counties on the outside of the cities, you'll see just as many students that are in special education that aren't black and brown. So I want to put that connotation first. So if we look at a dense area within a city, yes, you'll see that those numbers are high. But when you trickle out and you start to see the cultures and things like that start to spread out amongst the counties on the outside, you start to see it's actually pretty even.
So you don't think that the 7.8% of our children that are represented in special education is anything that we need to be alarmed about? And I'm just asking you to reiterate, because this is going to maybe help our parents have a desire, to foster a desire within our parents to just listen when the educator says, hey, maybe your kid needs help.
Well, we already have to understand that we as the African American community, we already learn differently. We love to get our hands dirty when it comes to learning. We want to touch, we want to feel, we want to experience. So we already need different modalities of learning experiences to truly come into, what it is to be educated. We like I said, I teach 10 years in the school district of Philadelphia in two different and in public and across the board approach. And a lot of the times they get misconstrued that approach needs to be special education, where sometimes it might need to be, but sometimes it doesn't. But I wouldn't, we have that higher number due to the fact of our socioeconomic status or color of our skin.
Okay. Now, how would you say that this has affected our ability or the ability of someone like yourself, someone that's a black male, an educator, and somebody that's passionate and who has remained passionate when it comes to educating our children? How has this played in? How has this whole topic of critical race theory and systemic racism played into what your abilities are, or hindered what your abilities are when it comes to educating our children?
Well, in the education system, I have to say it was built upon educating a certain class of people. Education, in the sense, since our ancestors came here during the diaspora, education has always been for a certain, built in a construct to serve a population that doesn't look like that. So coming into an educational system that's already geared toward one side and not equally, distributed to the other side, you can see those disparities. You can get discouraged when it comes to education. I've been the only black male teacher inside of schools plenty of times. I've been the only black male in the room during data meetings and during staff meetings, and the only other individuals that look like me, they're not even educated. They're climate and culture specialists where they deal with students with behavioral issues. So it's definitely challenging because it's already built against sense where we're trying to get a job done and service the children that need us the most, children that look like us, that look to men of color in positions that are educated, that want to do something that's different than the status quo. And because you want to represent something, you want to represent a system, but sometimes that system is flawed sometimes. It's so important for us to take advantage of the things that are in place, that are for the benefit for children and teachers and families, to be able to try to break out of these, systemic shackles that we're almost in. So I definitely can find frustration in the system. Does it work at times? Absolutely. Does it fail at times? Absolutely. But I think it's when we as a group of individuals, when it comes to irregardless of color, when we understand the mission to educate all children every day. That was the motto at the school that I came from. Every student, every day, all day, deserves to have an equal chance to learn.
So now we just stop for a minute and we acknowledge that, that you're saying there many times that you become frustrated. And I'm sure you and I can agree. I know you're not a parent yet, but in all actuality, you've been parenting children that you taught in the classroom for a decade, right? I watched you myself.
Absolutely.
So if we are to acknowledge that parents are frustrated and that you, the educator, become frustrated, it's not uncommon to feel frustrated at times. How can we then look at our community of parents and assure them that no black or brown child is going to be left behind? How do we do that? How do we take an active role to make sure that that doesn't happen?
So outside of the political arena, school board is a political thing. Outside of the politics of something, you have what's called advisory groups. Within every school, there's what's called an advisory group, and it's every stakeholder that has interest in that organization. So let's say I'm a part of the Romanay Lashley Elementary School. And the Romanay Lashley Elementary School, our advisory team is built up of the principal, the assistant principal, lead teachers, guidance counselor. Then you have the head of the Homeless School Association. You have community partners. You have businesses in the community. And all of these individuals sit on this committee to help try to make this called education. I love to point out the first school that I taught at in Philadelphia School District was Luis Munoz Marin Elementary School. And this shows you right here, I'm getting ready to show you how powerful the parent voice is. So this school is in the middle of a beautiful building built in 1997, wasn't even over 30 years old, and that's rare in the school district of Philadelphia to have a building not that old. And the school ended up failing so badly that, and I'll dive into this trend later on in the conversation, but the school failed so badly that it was getting ready to be turned over into a charter school and let the Masteries and the Kips take over this school and turn it into a charter school. But because this school was a predominantly Puerto Rican school, families came from Puerto Rico, moved into that community, a very rich and Hispanic culture there. The restaurants were delicious. The culture was there, but it still had those North Philly issues. And the students weren't performing. The teachers were failing. And the parents were fed up. They said, no, we don't want our school to be turned into a charter school. And what happens is the school would have been turned into a charter school, they would have lost the name, Luis Munoz Marin. They would have lost the name on it, they would have changed it all around, and they would have took the identity for what they considered the beacon of their. So the parents got together, teachers got together, community leaders got together, business leaders got together. And what they did as a common initiative was they said, no, we want our school to be better. So they fought. They went to the city hall. They went to these areas and fought the fight to get their information out there. And what ended up happening is they got the school to enter what was called at that time called the Acceleration Network now, but at that time it was called the Turnaround Network. And the Turnaround Network was a portion of the school district of Philadelphia that allowed those schools that were failing a second chance at staffing the school, with making sure there's qualified educators, competent, very motivated leaders, and just building around all of those an environment that's going to make those kids. And normally they give a school 5-6 years to get out of the Turnaround Network. They give you a 6-year plan. Well, because of their fight, that school ended up leaving the Turnaround Network in 3.5 years. So that shows you right there that the power of the community is so strong when it comes to education. People don't understand, too, that your property tax and the school tax is what funds your school. That's what goes there. Your dollar matters. Normally, last time I checked, every student is worth $6,540. That's how much it takes to make sure that child learns for that entire school year. So it empowers me to know the right people to make the right noise. Things can change educationally. So what do I say to the parents out there that are frustrated? Frustration is the first step in change. Because frustration leads to anger. Anger leads to wanting to make change, and change then impacts the kids that we service. And that school, 3.5 years, in a school where when we first got there, kids were smoking weed in the bathroom. Kids wasn't going to school. Kids was getting shot outside and dying. Numerous of my students was being killed. So literally, you're taking all of these outside influences, but these kids come to this safe haven that we have at the schools, and we change that school around. The teachers, the leaders, the parents, the community change that school around.
Now, Ron and I last week, we were talking, and what came up was that we noticed, both of us, as parents who raised children in the Poconos, that we noticed how we weren't really represented in instances where there were school board meetings. You didn't really see us represented as much as we should have been at parent-teacher conferences. You didn't even really see us represented on PTAs and you know, I could specifically remember even like with you playing football when you were a teenager and me running the concession stand and the football moms club and this club and that club. You don't really see us represented the way we should be in the Poconos. So, and I would just imagine that would be mirrored in other cities and states as well. So how would you guide parents within our community who are attempting to navigate through what many of us would identify as a racist system in states like the 13 states that I mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast? How would you guide parents to navigate through this system?
Well, first and foremost, before we start changing systems, you have to understand what your local school does. Because once you get a good grasp of what education is at your level, you'll be able to impact at a larger level. So I would always say, first and foremost, join your school's home and school committee. This is where the parents get to come on. And no matter what school district I was in, when I was an actual student to now being a teacher to being an administrator, we are underrepresented across the board, whether it's in the Poconos, whether it's in Philadelphia, whether it's in Delaware County. You don't see us. Now, I can say that in the district that I am in now, the president of the school board is a man of color. There's another woman of color who is the assistant vice president of the school board. So you see people of color fed up, and they wanted to make change. So they ran, and they were elected, and now they sit on the school board. They make decisions for the school district. So what I would say is first, just understand, because education is a very fluid organization. It's ever changing. This year will not look like last year. Last year won't look like the year before. It's ever changing. There's new initiatives. There's new pedagogy that we're going to do to teach and to learn, teaching and learning, the ability to impact the educator and to build an educator and professionally develop educators. There's numerous things to learn. So the first thing I would say is just get your feet in the pool. Just dip them in a little bit. Get your feet wet. See what education is. See how a school is run. See how decisions are made at your local school level. And then work your way up. Then work your way up higher than that. That's all it is. Just learning how the process works. Education isn't very accessible to people because it's so dense. It's so heavy when it comes to what we do. The data that we give out is very, very heavy, and if you don't have a good grasp on just basic understanding of what education is, you won't even be able to read the data that we put out. That is like 57% proficient in ELA. And then they're like, well, what does ELA stand for? English Language Arts. What does English Language Arts mean? English Language Arts compares to phonics. It goes to reading fundamentals, comprehension. It goes into all that. But it's so deep and dense with what things represent that it can be very confusing. So if you don't just go explore and watch and see how education is, you won't be able to be on the outside and try to figure it out. You have to get your feet wet and go on the inside and really see what the educational system is about. Go to your parent-teacher conferences. One of the biggest gripes that I have as a teacher is that during parent-teacher conferences, the students that really need their parents to come, they don't come. The students that I'm really trying to advocate for and to push and grow, they don't show up. And I would never want to bash my people, but I have to be honest. It's us. They show up. Our white counterparts, they show up. Brethren that are immigrants, they show up. But when it comes to American-born, for some reason, we don't show up. And it's always scared me, because if we just show up, if we just take the minute to really just say, I want to be 100% invested in my kid's destiny, educationally, you can literally change that young man or woman's life. So, just the little things. Join the home and school. Show up to parent-teacher conferences. Show up to when they have those open community sessions, those town hall meetings like some school districts call them, and they're breaking down what's going on. When it comes to districting and redistricting and how they're going to plot the new lines and new borders for each school, make sure you're knowledgeable on that, because you can be living at the edge of a border and your school could be a great school, and they redistrict and then put you in a school that's underserved and underprivileged. So be knowledgeable about how everything works. And that first step is join a home and school, parent-teacher conferences, and as you grow, then make that political move. Join the school board, join the school board committees, and things of that nature. So
now, if we're going to talk and we're going to deal transparently, right, which is really what we have to do, because we have to, get to a place where we begin to hold one another accountable, right, and where we help one another grow. So if we're going to really do that, then we have to be transparent. So if we look at this whole thing and we talk about parents being able to navigate through the system, right? The first thing you mentioned was how many parents maybe they even get the data. Maybe the data goes home and they can't read the data, right? So when do we as a community make a decision that maybe some administrators of color, some teachers of color might take the time to, and I'm going to go deep now. I'm going to go stretch, right? We take the time to say, I'm going to offer my services for 2 hours this semester to educate parents of color on how to look at these graphs and charts and how to look at these reports that we send home, so that they can look at these reports, read them, understand them, and then be able to make informed decisions. That's number one. Number two, after we come to the realization that we have to help educate the parents, right? Because a lot of them, even though black women are among the highest educated in this country in 2022, right? It is still pockets within our communities where maybe education wasn't emphasized as much as it should have been. So where we placing great emphasis on educating our children, it's not that they don't want to educate the children. Maybe they haven't really been taught the importance of educating our children, which again brings us right back around to the same question. When do we, right, the black social workers like myself, the black administrators like yourself, the black educators in the classroom, and I'm sure you know plenty of them, right? When do we collectively say that we are going to dedicate some of our time to teach parents, so that parents can be better informed and more knowledgeable when it comes to making decisions about their children, and even understanding what is the school board? Does everybody understand the power that the school board has? Does everybody understand the decisions that are made at school board meetings? Does everybody understand that the budgets that are set forth are established at school board meetings? Do people understand that items are vetoed and chopped down at school board meetings? New programs are implemented at school board meetings. Everything that we need to take place within our communities of color, we actually have the voice and power to change if we take an active role in the school board meetings. So what do you think our role is, within our own community, to be transparent and then to teach one another?
Well, first off, I had the privilege of being a teacher under one of the greatest leaders that's ever graced Philadelphia School District. I won't put his name out there because I didn't get permission to. He doesn't like that public stuff, but you know who I'm talking about. And I watched him do those things. I watched him create town hall opportunities, and that school served it used to be the largest elementary school in Philadelphia, and then they added a wing onto another school, and we got bumped down to the second largest elementary school. But while we were there, we serviced over 13 different languages, and we had students of color, refugees, we had immigrants, we had literally a melting pot of individuals. And I want to take it out of color for a second. I want to just put it in the sense of the educationally disadvantaged due to skin or descent when it comes from how are you getting into the country. And the students there, they, because their first language wasn't English, they can't even understand the data, period, because they don't know the language.
Right.
He got translators to come in. He brought in social workers that spoke different languages. And what he would do is he would take that data and make it into the simplest form for consumption by the parents. And the parents were multifaceted. You had parents, like I said, different languages, spoke different languages. Might not have had anything past a high school diploma. These things like that really create those barriers to help advocate for the kids. He removed those barriers and made it accessible to the parents. And that stakeholders are allowed to pick their principal. If I go back to the Marin story, that principal was selected by a parent panel. That this principal had to make a presentation to the parents and the stakeholders. So the parents picked that principal. And they picked him because that vision aligned with their vision. So we have the power to do those things. We can hold people accountable. Right now, I'm sitting in interviews trying to staff a position that is a very herald position in the district that I'm trying to fill. And the parents' voice is critical to me. I have parents sitting on the interview panel helping select this next individual that's going to take over this position. So make sure that you're sitting in that room. make sure that you're in those town halls, because people are going to make it accessible to you if you get the right leader in there. And if it's not the right leader, make noise. Make noise. You can remove. I've seen people removed because they don't service the people. They're there for their own personal agenda. So you have the right and the power and the privilege to make enough noise to change the system for your child and for your grandchildren and their children to come.
So would you agree then that we need to start encouraging the educators that we know within our own individual school districts? Because I never want to just focus on one district. We have to look at this as a whole. This is the state of black education in our country, right? So would you agree that we have to collectively begin to go to our educators and say, and I'm talking about leadership, that we need to go to our educators and say, we need you to help empower the parents. We need you to help empower the parents through education, through training, right? And sometimes just through some words of encouragement, right? Because guess what? As a social worker, I have to acknowledge that we can't even address education if we have families whose basic needs are not being met. That's the first order of business, right?
That's
so,
correct.
Being able to have our parents tap into different community resources that will help to provide basic needs, right? And then after we provide basic needs, maybe they can hear the importance of them being active, in the schools. When do we say to our pastors, how about that? When do we say to our pastors and to church leadership that you have to start to foster not just people assuming an active role within the church community, but empowering your membership who are parents to assume an active role in their community and within their school districts? Because until we begin at home, we can't change the community. You agree?
I agree. That's one of our biggest battles is understanding. We have this story that we tell during professional development. It's called "But I Didn't Have My Pencil," and it was about this boy who came into school, and they yelled at him, "You didn't have your pencil. I'm going to give you a 0 today." And the whole story goes from how the young man woke up, had to wake up earlier than anybody to help. Their mother went to work, had to wake up, help their little sister get dressed, put food in the microwave to warm it up, get themselves dressed, get off their bus pass, drop their sister off, get back on the bus, and go to school. And by the time they reach school and all that they done been through, the teacher immediately, as soon as the boy sits down and takes out his stuff, the boy forgot his pencil, he gets annihilated for not having his pencil. So what the story always are, when they get to you, you don't know what they've already been through by the time they got to you. You don't know what experience before 8:20, before they stepped into your classroom. So you have to understand everybody comes with different baggage. Everybody comes with different, and we have to make sure we're taught something that I've always prided myself with the kids that I've been charged to educate. Because when I build those relationships, I know that my student has joint custody. So I know weeks 1 and 3 of the month they're with dad, and weeks 2 and 4 they're with their mom. And when they're with their dad, they take advantage, so they don't do their work. When they're with their mom, they do their homework because mom stays on top of it. I know mom comes in more than dad, but dad does show up. But I know if I need to make sure that I don't have mom and dad in the same room at the same time because they can't get along. I need to make sure that I have to call mom and call dad at the same time. And that's just for one student. And sometimes there's 6 or 7 students like that. So you have to understand that every student has their own gripes that we have to make sure we serve and make sure we're not just teaching the kid, we're being a resource to not only the kid, but to the family as well. And having the family thrive is going to make sure that the student thrives. And that's why, and you could say this, that's why you and me always argue, because our professions are and the same things that we go through in social work and in education are very similar. And it's just you gotta meet the need, the hierarchy of needs.
Mm-hmm.
The need is the parent needs to feel so they can come and make sure the student is supported, and then the student succeeds.
So how do we incorporate this into church leadership? What should churches be encouraging their membership to do? Or should churches be taking the active role to take these reports and these charts and graphs and then teaching their membership? To me, these are all ways that we can get people taught, right? We can get people taught on how they can gain some power to change things within the school district. Because I can remember there was a time where if you study the history of public welfare, there was a time where the churches were responsible for feeding the community and providing shelter for the community. So everything that we look at now as being, public welfare's responsibility, it was a time that it was the church's responsibility. So now, do we now look at our churches and say it's time for you to take an active role in the educational systems as well? And when I say active role, I don't mean to incorporate the church, because I'm real clear on that whole concept of separation of church and state, right? So I get it. But when do we say, like, you as church leadership, you have a church, you have 300 members. Within that church of 300 members, you have 110 families, right? And maybe 110 families, where out of that 110 families, 90 of them fit into that bracket, a socioeconomic status that would put them on the lower end of the spectrum, right? So do we hold the churches responsible and say, you have to be held responsible and teach these people and empower parents so that they can go and create effective change in the school, which ultimately will create effective change in the community?
Well, I really want to, as much as I, being a pastor and growing up in church, I always want to include the church. But I think in this aspect, because our schools are so diverse now, and so diverse when it comes to different cultures religiously, I would say that we would actually be at a disadvantage, because the church would be able to support a very small population of a school community where, let's say in Philadelphia, with the majority, the highest, membership when it comes to a religious group is our Islamic brothers and sisters. They have the largest population when it comes to a religious. So in my class, I might have 20 students who are Muslim and maybe 5 that are Christian, and then the 3 might be into one of the other religions from, their immigration status, from maybe Hinduism or Buddhism. So they might come from different backgrounds. So I don't want to put all the pressure on the church. I need to put pressure on these organizations that come in and try to pimp education. I'm talking about these outside organizations that come in, that do after-school programming, that the Meals on Wheels programs, and the like for instance, there was one called Youth Corps that come in and they do after-school programming, but that's it. There's no type of connection between the parents. And we as a community need to remove the daycare stamp off of education, because that's exactly what it is. We have turned from education from being a place where future leaders are born, and we've shifted it into the fact that it's just free childcare. And we need that's where we need to start as a community, irregardless of religion. We need to understand that, and COVID showed it. Because as soon as schools were allowed to open again, parents, even if parents were out of work still, or still at home, or whatever their situation was, those kids were right back in school, because it was free childcare. That's why you don't see parents coming out to parent-teacher conferences. That's why you don't see engagement, because we have to change our mindset as a people that this is a pathway The school to prison pipeline is real. The achievement gap, these things are real because we don't pay attention to it. Because we are so removed from education. We don't pay our teachers well enough. We don't pay administrators well enough. Teachers, I did 10 jobs as a classroom teacher. I was a social worker. I was a babysitter. I was a nurse. I was a friend. I was a parent. I was everything to those kids. And I used to tell them that all the time. I see you more than I see my family. I pour into you more than I pour into my family. So, and if we as the educators, because that is our profession, have to be so invested, I expect, because that's your bloodline, you should be even more invested. And I think that's where we need to start. We need to identify the people on the outside that are pimping education and using it. And the one people that I need us to understand is the charter schools. When my first job was at a charter school, and I watched how they preyed on the fact that schools were failing, and they snatched up these kids, and because the building was new and pretty, the kids were excited, but yet there was uncertified educators in the building. And not only were they uncertified, they were paid extremely below what a normal certified teacher will be paid. And they were worked even harder and overworked. And you think that that's going to change the educational status quo?
Absolutely not.
These are the things that we have to understand. And I can go into music education as well, because they do it even more music education. And they took advantage of the 2012 budget cuts that cut the arts. And now there's all these programs that are charging astronomical rates for students to be able to be provided with music education and art education. So it's just, it's turned into a daycare / money business. And we need to move away from that.
A lot of people don't even understand what the 2012 cut was all about. And just to make sure we keep everybody well informed, that was just budget cuts that involved cutting the arts from schools. So why we don't see all the arts programs that we used to see within the schools is because they were cut. It's the first place that they made major cuts, which was really unfortunate, because there's a whole bunch of talented kids within these schools, right? And so much happens with art. Kids, you have music therapy, you have art therapy, it's so much that takes place when kids participate in the arts, right? So that's another area that parents didn't have as much of a voice as they should have had with the schools. So I know, Chris, I know we're starting to run out of time. I want to make sure that we don't spin our wheels in the mud. And I want to make sure, as your mom, I always say, if you come to the table and you only come to the table presenting the problem with no possibilities for solutions, then you're part of the problem, right? So now what I would ask you now is, what can we do to help? What can we do to help you to provide our children with the quality educations that they deserve? What can we do, Chris?
Just investment. And I'm not talking monetary. I'm talking 5 to 10 minutes. And Chris, how can 5 to 10 minutes change? 5 to 10 minutes of interaction with your student's teacher goes a long way. There's a two-way line with that. One is an accountability within the teacher and accountability with their parent, and then it becomes a partnership. And then that partnership trickles, because here's what happens. People don't know this happens behind the scenes. But when we pass our students on to the next grade, we give that next teacher all the information on that student, what their strengths are, what their weaknesses are, how involved are their parents. Those are, and nobody tells people that. That's a part of education that not a lot of people know. And that's what happens if you're a very, very involved parent. That next teacher knows. So that next teacher can rely on you and can pour into you and vice versa. So that's where it starts, just in the classroom that your child is in. And now for my friends that might be, they don't have children in school anymore, there's parents that sit on right now on our board of band parents at my school district now that I work with. that don't have any students in the school anymore. But because their students were so involved and they were involved for so long, they didn't want to give up advocating for future students. So advocate for the children in your community. Jump on those committees. Jump on those board opportunities. Just involvement. And whatever involvement looks like to you, that's the first step. And I promise you it'll grow from there. That's when the principals start relying on you more. That's when the leadership in the building starts to rely on you more. You become a resource to the building. So I think that could be a very good place to start, and then it'll just bloom from there.
So I think in essence, in simplest terms, I think what Chris is saying is to show up, right? You need us to show up.
Yep.
You need us to show up, and you need us to say we are here to do whatever it is you need us to do to help you educate our children, right? And then the other thing that I want to just mention, because I wouldn't be a social worker if I didn't mention this, is take the time, each of us, to give thought. Just like Chris said, even if your kids are not in school anymore, just give thought to the kids who are going to school. Give thought to, there's some kids who come to school in the morning and last night they were beat. There's some kids who come to school in the morning and last night they were sexually assaulted. There are some kids who come to school in the morning and they didn't have dinner or breakfast. There are some kids who come to school in the morning and they slept at a shelter, right, where their mom or their father stayed up all night to make sure nobody did sexually assault them, right? So we have to stay very cognizant that things aren't as black and white as they seem, right? There are a lot of gray areas with our children. There are, and that's not just within our community. That's in every community. It's in every community. There are children who are being abused or neglected and they go unnoticed, right? Because somebody didn't take the time to look beyond, like Chris said, the pencil that the boy didn't come to school with, right? Instead of just giving the child a pencil. Because it really was that simple. Just give them a pencil. I don't care why you don't have the pencil. Just give them the pencil. And then maybe you want to reach out to a parent and give the parent some pencils. But I wanted to mention this because what I want to do is I want to be able to take this topic and to start to mesh it into what we'll talk about next week, because I made a commitment that if we were to do this show, that this would be a for us, by us space where we could be transparent and really talk about the areas that we need to grow and stretch ourselves in as a people, as a culture, right? So we could come up, right? So I wanted to be able to tie this into next week's topic of child support within the Black community. And how about this? The family court system and how it affects the Black community. Because newsflash, people, the family court system ties into what we just mentioned when it comes to basic needs being met, right? Child support ties into basic needs being met. Even placements and how you talked about, Chris, how parents have split custody. And how the two parents who both love the children, split custody seems like the most rational thing to do so that both parents have time with the kids. But is it really the best thing for the child, right? Is it really giving the child everything that the child needs? And I'm not saying that it's not, and I'm not saying it is. I'm saying I feel like these are topics that we need to really reason about. We need to reason. We need to have a conversation for us, by us, so that we can, number one, dismantle the myths that have been tied to African American child support and this judicial system that, I'm sorry, was built on critical race theory, systemic racism, right? Because remember what I said that in the beginning of the show. This was how critical race theory came about, because they were looking at the law and how it wasn't objective. So I wanted to be able to tie this into next week's topic, and to just let everybody know that next week we're gonna get together, right, and sit and reason about child support. Is it damaging our black men? Are we slighting our children when we don't go for child support? Are we damaging our black men when we do go for child support? And how does this tie into the custodial parent being able to make sure that basic needs are met for the children? So I hope that, Christopher, I know I wish you could come back again. I hope that at minimum, I know your schedule is busy, but I hope at minimum you'll listen in next week as we start to reason about some other areas in our community. Thank you for coming on.
You know I got you, mama. You know I got you.
I enjoyed you. Make your mama proud. All right, people. Thank you. Terry,
always,
thank
always.
you. I don't even know, Terry, if you had a chance to say anything. Was there anything you wanted to say? Did you have an opinion?
Y'all covered everything.
Okay. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Grace and peace. This is Romanay saying good night on behalf of Ron and myself. See you next week. Bye.